And we now welcome in two-time Fantasy Analyst of the Year, Jamey Eisenberg, as we can officially close the chapter on Week 1 of the 2024 NFL season, and quite the finale for fantasy owners as the 49ers left many managers in a panic 90 minutes before kick with the Christian McCaffrey news. Now, hopefully, in some leagues, Jared Mason was available on the waiver wire. He said post-game, though, that he knew he was getting the start back on Friday. That would have been nice to know. But Jamey, just how frustrating is a situation like this, especially you're considering this is the final game of the NFL slate, leaving a lot of people scrambling?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, we need to be clear. Just because he may have been told that he was starting on Friday, that doesn't necessarily mean that Christian McCaffrey was going to be 100% ruled out. But you could obviously put two and two together, that if McCaffrey was going to play, he most likely would be the starter. But if everybody knew this, first off, for what we do as fantasy analysts, Jordan Mason would have been most likely a top 10 running back, certainly in the top 20 in terms of being ranked. McCaffrey would not have been ranked number one. I think we saw the performance and we knew what he was capable of doing when we saw in the preseason. But you look at the roster percentage. He's rostered in only 66% of leagues on CBSSports.com. I'm going to guess just based on how our leagues typically go, that's lower on other sites. So he was available to a lot of fantasy managers. Unfortunately, because of the 90-minute before the Monday night game time frame, you weren't able to go out and get him because you have to drop somebody to go get him. So the fantasy managers that had Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason, they were fine. I know I have that in a couple leagues myself where I had McCaffrey. I made sure to get Jordan Mason because of the calf injury and because you know that the backup to San Francisco is going to produce potentially like this. So clearly this was a frustrating situation. A lot of people lost their leagues that had Christian McCaffrey. On the flip side, a lot of people won their leagues that were facing Christian McCaffrey with a 15 to 20 point deficit, knowing that he's capable of making that up. So this was a very tough situation to deal with if you were on the wrong side of it as the McCaffrey fantasy manager. However, if you have Jordan Mason, or if you're able to put Jordan Mason in your lineup, you clearly benefit in a big way. And now we have to see what happens going into week 2 if McCaffrey will be able to return.
Absolutely something to monitor as we look ahead to week 2. But before we get to that point, I want to talk about the other side of this Monday night matchup. We finally got to see the full Aaron Rodgers New York Jets experience, but it fell a little bit flat against that Niners defense. I just want to get your overall impressions from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, he looked like I think you had to expect, 40-year-old quarterback coming off a lot of missed time, a significant injury. We saw it with Kirk Cousins. We saw it with Deshaun Watson. We see it with Aaron Rodgers. When guys come back from injuries that are as detrimental as they were, 2 Achilles and a shoulder injury, these guys are going to struggle a little bit, especially when they don't play in the preseason. This is their first action. And oh, by the way, getting thrown into the fire going into San Francisco and playing that defense. So he had some good throws, some good moments, but clearly the overall performance was terrible. I think we need to see a little bit more from Mike Williams coming back from his also tough injury, ACL tear in week 3 last year for the Chargers. But I think we'll see more from Garrett Wilson. We'll see more from Breece Hall. And I think this offense will continue to be a work in progress. So to expect him to come out in week 1 and be dominant at his age, that injury, not exactly something that I was anticipating. So, again, we'll see what happens moving forward. Unfortunately, another tough matchup for him going into week 2 against a good Titans defense that made Caleb Williams look pretty bad in week 1. So don't have high expectations for Rodgers right away.
Hey, Jamey, but Alan Lazard did account for 2 of the Jets' 3 touchdowns on the night. He's currently not rostered in 98% of CBS Sports leagues right now. How do you envision his value being in this offense looking ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to let other people in my leagues go chase him. He'll certainly be somebody we talk about in the waiver wire column and all of our shows that we do tomorrow because, like you said, he did have a 2-touchdown performance that's hard to overlook. And this is a guy that Aaron Rodgers has loved. He did get the 2nd touchdown from Tyrod Taylor, so a guy that Nathaniel Hackett is going to lean on. But I think as Williams gets more acclimated and healthier, he'll take on a little bit of a bigger role. I also think Garrett Wilson is not going to be held to 60 yards receiving, so that's something to keep in mind. So usually when you see performances like this, you don't want to chase it. So comparing it to some of the other waiver wire guys that we'll talk about, and certainly based on what we'll talk about on our podcast on CBS Sports HQ, CBS Sports Network. Going to be a lot of waiver wire conversation on Tuesday. Alan Lazard will be a little bit low on the pecking order despite the performance tonight.
All right, don't chase Monday night's performance. I mean, we got some other waiver wire business we'll talk about in just a bit, but I want to discuss those winners and losers from Monday night's game. And we got to start on at least the positive front. Who would you say was the biggest fantasy winner for Monday Night Football?
Yeah, it's pretty easily Jordan Mason, and so, again, what we talked about at the start of the segment here, when you have the running back for San Francisco, it's clearly Christian McCaffrey's on a different level, but Jordan Mason showed you that he could be Christian McCaffrey light and perform at that type of perform at a very high level enough that you could say, okay, if McCaffrey's not going to be there, I don't care who the opponent is, and the Jets have a very good defense, that he can carve this defense up and carve most defenses up. Now, you didn't see the same type of work in the passing game, so that's something that's a little bit different from McCaffrey, but clearly when you look at 28 carries carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown. That's elite level running back numbers. And so whoever is going to be back there, this is why we were hyping up Elijah Mitchell in the beginning of August and obviously throughout the summer. Go get him because McCaffrey, 28 years old, coming off a 400 total touch season, and then the calf injury. So Mason, even if you have him on your team and McCaffrey comes back, please do not think about getting rid of him, because we know that McCaffrey can miss time again later in the season. But as long as McCaffrey is out for the foreseeable future, Jordan Mason will be in your starting lineup.
A smart stash right there in case you do have CMC and he is back in week 2. But on the contrary, probably a lot of hope in some performers, but maybe some fell short. Who would be your biggest fantasy loser for Monday night?
Yeah, there were a lot of guys. Rodgers was the biggest loser, but I think you got to talk about some of the other players here. And so Brandon Ayuk, we thought he would struggle a little bit, so not somebody I think you want to panic on just yet. Again, shaking off the rust, first game back after the hold out, hold in, not playing in the preseason, not participating fully in training camp. I wouldn't panic about him. We saw Brock Purdy, no touchdowns. Again, this is a Jets defense that's really good, so don't panic about him just yet. Garrett Wilson, again, 6 for 60. There are a lot of losers across the board here. Really, it was the 2 running backs that stood out. And let's give the kicker some love. Jake Moody with a huge night. So sometimes we overlook the kicker. A lot of fantasy managers don't like to give those guys some praise. Jake Moody had a big night for San Francisco.
Patting myself on the back with that one because I definitely got Jake Moody in my lineup. All right, we got to wrap this thing up, and let's look ahead to week 2. Some injuries in several key positions this past week, perhaps some lackluster performances, movement on the depth charts, whatever the case might be. Some fantasy managers ready to scour that waiver wire. So who are your top targets that might be available heading into the second week of the season?
Well, when you look at Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle, really Kyle Pitts, the only one to find the end zone. Tight end position was bad. And so Isaiah likely comes out that first game and looks like an absolute superstar. And so will that continue to that level? Probably not. But he's somebody that should be added across the board, 100% of leagues. By the time we get to Tuesday night or certainly Wednesday night when all the waivers run, he's going to be the number 1 priority for a lot of fantasy managers. Baker Mayfield, if you need a quarterback, we saw a lot of bad quarterback play again tonight. 2 guys that didn't combined for 20 fantasy points in terms of their overall performance. So a lot of people could be looking at Baker Mayfield after that 4-touchdown game. Then a couple of running backs to keep an eye on here. Bucky Irving looks like he's going to be the second guy in Tampa Bay, injury away from being the next Jordan Mason. And right now, Zach Charbonnet is playing behind Ken Walker, who was awesome against the Broncos, but he has that abdomen injury. Charbonnet could be very popular if he's going to be the starter for Seattle for maybe a game or 2 if Walker has to miss. There's no guarantee he's going to miss week 2. But last year we saw Charbonnet step up in the 2 games that Walker was out. Could clearly be the same thing again in 2024.
Yeah, and also I'm looking at that Baker with people that might be struggling with that Jordan Love news depending on how long he is out. Jamey, as always, appreciate you stopping by. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
And if you want to dominate your league, make sure you join Jamey, Dave Richard, Heath Cummings, and Adam Azer throughout the season on Fantasy Football Today podcast. Make sure you download and follow.